Role-playing a character can be a challenge. It can be difficult to get into the mindset of someone who lives in a completely different world, has a completely different set of skills, and oftentimes a completely different worldview than yourself. But Jake and I have found that if you use these three simple steps, you should have a lot easier time understanding your character. So stay tuned as we talk about how to flesh out and develop your character in D&D or any other tabletop RPG.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to this J&J Tabletop video. My name is Jake, and with me as always is Josh. We're glad to be back at it in the new year. And like Josh mentioned before, these tips are going to be good for any tabletop role-playing game. And so we like to kind of start in the prep phase of fleshing out a character. And that's, if we're going to use the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons as a guideline, that's the PIVs. The Pibs. Mr. Pibb here is going to help us out, Josh. So what do we mean by that, and
Oh,
why is that important?
I'm Mr. Piv. I can't be Dr. Pepper.
You're Mr. Pibb.
That's fair. All right. I guess it makes sense. The pips, right? You might be watching that saying, that's a D&D thing. Well, maybe, but it's a good frame of reference. So what are they? Personality, ideals, bonds, flaws, flaws.
Love
Yes, I
it.
know I said that twice. So I think it's just a good lens to look at your character and learn these things and come up with a couple just small details about it, right? So we kind of broke that down. Personality is how they approach things, what makes them who they are. That could be as simple as they're introverted or they're extroverted, or as complicated as like getting into the nitty gritty of how I don't know. They're getting into what's an example of the nitty gritty. I don't know.
Just can't not say bad words all the time. I've got a potty mouth. But it's just like
uh,
personality quirks, like little things that make them them.
Absolutely. I mean, think about your personality and break that down. Maybe don't go too much into that. I don't know what you're
Yeah, this
feeling,
isn't therapy, Josh.
but yeah, this isn't therapy.
We need to go to Dr. Pepper for that. Mr. Pibb is not
Yeah, you're
qualified.
right. I'm not that. All right. See, now I appreciate it because if I
Yes.
was Dr. Pepper, I'd probably lose my medical license. So then you get into their ideals. What do they value? There's a lot that you could learn about a person through what they value, a person or a character. I feel like what they value tells more of a story of them than what their personality is, and it almost dictates what their personality might be. Those two could play hand in hand. If all someone cares about is money, you're gonna you're gonna know, and they're gonna act a certain way, they're gonna be a certain way.
Yep.
We all know people like that. What they care about is helping people. They're gonna act a certain way, and people are gonna respond to them accordingly. And you also know people like that, and I bet you like those people more than the people who only care about money.
Probably. Yes. I think another thing to consider with that is, why do they value what they value? Is it something in their
Mm,
past maybe that prompted that value? Is it something they were raised with? Is it something that they were raised without and that's why they value? There could be 101
yeah.
paths to that, but if you can answer why, now you've got a little bit more to go on.
And we mentioned briefly about like how other people feel about them, like your bonds, right? How do you connect with people? That also goes back into personality, right? Like, are you introverted, extroverted, whatever? And I think it's the interesting thing is that I think we call it PIBs because you can't really talk about just a bond or just an ideal or anything like that. They all kind of go hand in hand. They're all together creating the one thing, which is your character. So how does your character connect with others? Are they an empath? Do they like people? Are they a people person? They really understand you? Are they the type of person that's like people are tools and I want to get whatever I can out of them and throw them away when they're done, or are lives precious? These are like little questions that they speak thousands of words about what your character is and how they feel.
Something that has always been a way I connect to others is playing games, whether that was playing in Little League or hockey as a kid, or playing video games, even playing board games, whatever. I'm guessing you probably have a similar connection point because you're watching this video. So things like that, just consider, what is it that makes you feel bonded to somebody? And that could be at least a good place to start and understand how this concept is. And then imagine it for the character you're going to play.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that also brings us to our fourth and fifth point here. Flaws. What do they struggle with? And I wrote flaws twice because flaws, I think there's not a lot of people who do them correctly. I want to say correctly just feels like such a harsh word and not the right
Mm.
word. But I think people overplay their flaws and people underplay their flaws, and it's
Yes.
not like you have the person who's like chooses a flaw and then it just never comes up and they do everything they can for it to not come up. And then you also have the person who's like, my character likes to steal things, so I've stolen something from every room that we
Every
ever
time.
walked in,
Yeah,
even though I
zero.
know everyone was staring at me, like,
Yes. Zero self-control.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Or I like to start fights, so I fought the king because he disrespected me. It's like,
Sure.
well, they're still probably smarter than that, even if you're a hothead.
Some of my
But
favorite flaws are actually like hidden flaws.
yes,
So, if you're familiar with ancient relics and Hoki religions, I think the character whose flaw is the most hidden is Melly. Josh and I both know what her flaw is. Izzy knows what her flaw is. I'm not sure Evan and Michael know, but it's something that's there. It's something that I have seen drive different subtle things that Melly has done throughout the adventure. It's kind of underneath the surface. So,
yeah,
Josh, you wrote flaws twice. Maybe one's kind of more out there and visual and seeable or noticeable, and the other's a little more. Wait a minute, you're
yeah.
a tricksy little thing, aren't you? And I know something's there that
Yeah.
you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's like how different flaws might affect how your character portrays them. If your flaw is like I frequently mispronounce big words or I curse a lot, okay, yeah, that's gonna be pretty obvious. You're gonna notice that. But if your flaw is something like I secretly think I should be in control of everything, maybe you'll be a little bit more secretly manipulative. And like it'll take a closer eye to actually notice that. But regardless of whether it's something that's in your face or something that's more in the background, your character should definitely have a flaw because we all have flaws as humans and that makes us interesting.
Yep, I have one flaw, so that's it's
Hmm.
harder for me to come up with extra flaws.
The second tip that we have here is about considering your background and your past. Jake, tell me a little bit about this. Why is a background important? Why does your past matter? Should it matter?
Your background and your past absolutely matters. Now, this could be something that actually does affect game mechanics. In 5th edition, you get trained skills. You get a way to sleep somewhere for free. You get a starting amount of gold. You get some equipment, maybe an item or two that's special to you. And there can be game mechanics involved. And maybe it just helps shape some of the choices that you choose because of that, too. But sometimes the past helps form who you are today. So I think it's just worth considering, how did this character grow up? How did they become an adventurer? Or how did they first learn skills to be an adventurer? If you're playing a fighter, how did they learn how to fight? Were they a soldier? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe maybe they're an acolyte and somehow they became a fighter. I don't know. There could be a lot of different ways to explain it, but it's going to flavor certain values. It's going to flavor certain ways they approach situations, on top of just having a set of skills that Liam Neeson might have and possess if you take one of his family members.
I am reminded of one of my favorite characters in all of literature. Of course, I'm speaking of Darrow of Lycos from Red Rising. His background is such where he sees his father and he sees his uncle and he sees the way that they talk to people and treat people and the way that he does as well in this position that he has in like a mine. He understands the importance of talking to people face to face and remembering them and who they are. Fast forward years later, you see him going through and talking to these foot soldiers who are absolutely like it doesn't really matter, right? Like he's a god to some of these people. And he remembers their names and he says something along the lines of if you forget someone's name, they'll forgive you, but if you remember their name, they'll die for you. Different characters who grew up in nobility or anything like that, they might not care. That might not matter to them, but someone who grew up low and grew up in a certain position, he knows that this matters to people, and that changes how he interacts with everyone.
Yep.
And what like matter, he does his best to remember the names and everything because he knows it's important. He spends the time having conversations with people who are way lower on the totem pole than he is. And that's just a small aspect of someone's background just affecting even just their conversations and stuff and their ideals and bonds and that kind of thing. So it's
Like you said,
important.
it goes hand in hand. Like you said before, if you forget their name, they'll forgive you, and if you remember their name, they'll die for you. Even that phrasing could be interpreted a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Like, wait, so is the goal to get people to die for you? Like,
Yeah,
wait,
is it a
hold
form
on a
of
second.
manipulation? Yeah.
Or it could just be like because I would die for them too, or something like that.
Mhm.
I'm telling them, like, is it that they're important, or is it that I'm going to let them think they're important? Like, you could approach that different ways, and that's going to be. It could look similar from the outside, but like we said before, something could be underneath it. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about today is to let this story play out or kind of like unfold naturally. And Josh, that kind of makes me feel like when you're watching a movie or a TV show, especially a TV show, like in the first season, characters can get kind of awkward and they could kind of grow and change as time goes on. Have you ever noticed that in your games before?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you want an example of that happening in a TV series, by the way, you should watch New Girl. It's excellent. And I think watching them find who they want those characters to be is a fun journey. But I've absolutely seen that happen with my characters in games. I think if you're playing them correctly, I don't
So, so
use that
cringe.
word. All right, how about not correctly? If you're doing it right, no.
Oh!
Like if you're doing your characters justice, you're going to let them change over time. Your character shouldn't just be this idea that you had and they stick to that and they're exactly that always. Maybe that's their flaw that they're dogmatic and they're not going to change their ways ever and they're stubborn. But even then, it's a more interesting story if at some point something forces them to. Your characters should be changing and they should be developing based on the situations that they're in and the people that they're sharing those situations with. I think of like Echo let's just start with Echo before I mention the second half of that. Episode 1, episode 2, Ancient Relics, Hokey Religions. He's got a spear. He brutally runs people through with his spear, I think is how he described it without all of the details.
Yeah.
And that changed him. It's not something that he wrote when he made his character, but as he understood the character's ideals, bonds, flaws, all that kind of stuff, he knew where he was from, right? His background is that he hasn't seen and done a lot of things. He lived in a monastery for a lot of his time, and he's practiced a lot of things, but he hasn't put his practice into real life application. And using that spear and actually stabbing people and seeing that loss of life, it changed him, and it changed his outlook on things. And he got rid of that spear and changed it into a quarterstaff. Is he still killing people? Yeah, it still happens, but it just felt less brutal and less I
Visceral. There's something
visceral.
different about it.
Thank
I
you.
think that affected him.
Yes, and then fast forward way down the road, like
Yeah. Enter back the
like
assassin rogue.
yeah, yeah. 40 something sessions later, you have Echo. He's learning more about like Master Dinois and all this stuff going on and these plots. And he's also spending his time with Mac, who is a ruthless assassin. And I love Mac, but he's a ruthless assassin. And that's also changing him. So now Echo's learning how to use a dagger. And he has a spear again, too. And he's not doing that all the time. There's a time for the spear and there's a time for the quarterstaff, and he does use both of them. That's growth in a character. His initial, when he made that character, he was like, he's going to use a spear that's going to look cool, it's going to be awesome. Then it actually happened. He realized that his character would not be okay with that. And then through the adventure, through the influence of people he was with on that adventure, he said, well, you know what? I've grown to understand that sometimes it's okay and necessary, and other times it's not. Did he end up at maybe the same place or similar place that he would have been when he started? Sure, I guess you could say that because he is using edged weapons again, but it's way more interesting and he knows a lot more about his character because of how we got to that point instead of just staying there.
I think that is a fantastic example because Mac and Echo are as yin and yang as they get. They're both halflings, and if you ask me, that's pretty much where the similarities stop. They're both guys, you know.
They
That's
both
a
get to
thing too.
re-roll those.
They both get. Oh my gosh, yes. But the bond that the two of them have, because of how different they are, makes it special. We could have used Mac as an example for Echo's influence on Mac because I think one thing that I've noticed about Mac is his sense of morality is extremely external. He's always looking to see, like, is this okay? Is this not okay? And it might seem like, you know, he just doesn't care because he's Mac and he just killed someone brutally, but he has had conversations with Echo about that because he knows how significant of a situation and decision point that is for Echo. So I love seeing characters change. Actually, if you are watching this and you have an example from whether a character you played or a game you played in where you saw something start out one way with a character and then change along the way, I would love to hear that in the comment section. And if you are interested in seeing some more tips that we have about making characters, particularly about what you might want to say avoid, you should check out the video that's on screen now. It probably has a picture of Jon Snow on it. He's a good character. You should click on that. Or maybe the other one.
Yeah, we'll tell you how to make the correct character.
Yes.